Good afternoon and welcome to the next session of the PEPI webinar series. And today I will be presenting to you the Irish model and the legal framework for debt advice that exists in Ireland. I'm Gwen Harris, Regional Manager in North Dublin MABS. So the Money Advice and Budgeting Service, or MABS as we are commonly known, I will explain to you about the Money Advice and Budgeting Service. And today I will discuss the structure of the MAB service, how the MAB service is funded in Ireland, who can access MABs, and the consumer rights to debt advice that exist and are legislated for in Ireland. So very briefly, the evolution of MABs. And the reason I'm going to explain the evolution of MABs is that it does show how our service has grown and how our funding model has changed and adapted. The Money Advice and Budgeting Service, as I mentioned, known as MABS, is 30 years old this year, being established in 1992 on a pilot basis as a community project. There were only 5 pilots and they were all funded through the Department of Social Welfare directly. These pilots were established to combat concerns about money lending in low-income households that existed in Ireland, and this was outlined in a report issued by Combat Poverty Agency in 1988. The pilots were then evaluated in 1995, and this was actually the second evaluation. The first in 93 found that it was too early to evaluate any impact of these pilots. So a second evaluation took place in 95 and a decision by government then to roll services out nationally was taken. So today there are now 8 regional companies and 2 national companies, and we have 60 locations across Ireland. And these locations similar to the 5 pilots in 1992. In fact, all 5 pilots are still in existence. All staff in MABS are paid. We have no volunteers. However, we are all managed by a board of management directors. All the directors are actually volunteers. So how is MABS funded? From 1992 to 2009, MABS was funded directly from the Department of Social Welfare. And as I mentioned, the service grew from 5, and in 2009, there were 53 companies being funded at the time. The service funding was secured on a 3-year basis following submissions by each MABS company based on a work project, work plan to support their proposed budget. In October 2008, the Minister for Finance announced that the MAB service would now be assigned to the Citizens Information Board, called CIB, with the Department of Social Welfare retaining overall policy and financial responsibility for MABs. The legislative footing and the legislative basis for this change was set out in the Social Welfare Act of 2008. And if you note the date 2008, this actually took place in June 2008. So it was before the worldwide financial crisis of September 2008. Today in MABS, we remain 100% funded and supported by the Citizens Information Board, or CIB, and they have the legal legislative responsibility for organising debt services in Ireland. Continue then of how we're funded, and this is an excerpt from the legislation that I've spoken of, the 2008 the Social Welfare Act, and it is an amendment to a previous act of 2007. And the reason that I share this with you is actually the act and how it's written has helped form the objectives of MABS, or rather the objectives of MABS existed and the act supported them, but we have continued with these legislative obligations and objectives. So you can see here that MABS has a breadth of services. Our primary is debt advice and debt counselling. However, we are also legally supported or legislated to provide education in respect of money management, and we will be talking about this throughout the webinars and on the academy. We're also required to publish data relating to the provision of our service, and this is to inform government who is accessing the MAB service, who needs our supports. But also from that, we gather data and we create submissions or we draft policies and research papers based on the lived experience of our clients, the lived experience of policy that exists in legislation in Ireland, and how that may have an unintended consequence and may exclude people from other services or other benefits. And then our final one is again that we do complete the we don't just commission research externally, we complete it ourselves. So we do have two obligations there, and we also work in partnership with other agencies, partners, other government departments in the delivery of money management education. So as you see now, the objectives of MABS all support that section in the 2008 Act. So our first one is the delivery of one-to-one debt advice. We also work in partnership, and I mentioned this there, with other agencies and voluntary groups, support groups. And the reason for this, and we all know this, we're not working in isolation when we're dealing with debt and debt advice. There are many causes for debt, there are many consequences. And because of that, MABS has found that working in partnership with other support agencies helps us to sustain a more holistic service. So we're not dealing just with the debt, we're dealing maybe with what has given rise to the debt. Maybe it's a policy issue, maybe it's an educational issue. And we work with other groups that work with our clients in those areas. We also believe in community development, and this is that the communities do help shape our service. We rely on client feedback to ensure that our processes are still user friendly, and this would be something maybe quite relevant at the moment, where we will have new people to Ireland coming in from the Ukraine that might need our services, and then we might have to adapt maybe how we deliver our service, maybe our literature. And our client feedback and customer feedback is really important in that. But also the communities. So we engage with community groups to see what issues are in that community that maybe MABS should be working on. So that could be some areas may have a high, um, say, a high prevalence of money lending, and maybe we need to address that through education. And in other areas, they might have transport issues in rural areas, and we might be able to work on that with other agencies. Equal access. One of our objectives is to ensure that everybody has equal access to money advice in Ireland. And our primary target group is people who are on low income. And over the years, this has evolved from people who are on social welfare income, state income, to people who are working but maybe have low disposable income. But we ensure that everybody has equal access. Our service is free. We do not have an eligibility of income or of debts for people to access our service, but also geographic location. MABS has 60 offices, as I mentioned, around the country, but some of these offices, they could be in quite a rural area. So we also have access to available to everybody through our national helpline. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. I mentioned policy change showing the lived experience of our clients, maybe showing some new trends, key trends in debt or in credit access. But also then our final one is in money management education. And we work not alone on this, we do work with other agencies, but we do try and do this as well. With every client we meet one-to-one to try and help increase their money management or financial capacity. So who can access the MABS service? As I mentioned, MABS is a free service and it is available to everybody in Ireland. We work not just with people who are in debt currently or who have some uh, problem debt that they're trying to manage, but we also work with people who may not have debts, but maybe are worried that their debt might become a problem, or maybe they want to save. And we work with people in general budgeting. It's free to all, as I've mentioned, and we have a number of ways that people can access our national helpline and our MABS offices. They've delivered debt advice. And the difference between debt advice and debt counselling is with the debt advice, we don't represent the client, we don't represent to a creditor or to a court, whereas with debt counselling, that is available and advocacy through our offices, our local offices. That is where we would advocate, represent, or negotiate on behalf of our client. Their debt solutions are available through our MABS offices. And again, this would be on foot of assessment and an advocacy agreement. And we assess everybody for all their options. And then we offer them the most, well, we do offer everybody a choice of all debt solutions that are available to them. And we hope that they'll pick, and we help to guide them pick the most suitable one. We do money management education as well, and this sometimes is a good vehicle for people, or a good way for people to think, oh, I want to engage with MABS, because as we all know, having debt or money management issues carries a stigma and some shame. And when we're out and we're meeting communities and we're doing money management education talks, that's when sometimes people feel that they can approach us, and they feel that they're maybe not as embarrassed anymore. So that's another way that people access our services. But also, we have a website. We have a national website, and on that website, and indeed our social media, we have a number of tools that people can use if they wish to maybe regain control, take control of the budget themselves. They might want to talk to their creditors. Maybe they don't want to avail of MABS, and or they might feel, okay, I just want to get my house in order, do some budgeting. So on our website and our social media, we have access to budgets, fact sheets, step-by-step guides, where people can do the money advice process themselves if they feel strong enough to do so. And they can also access these tools through our helpline and through our MABS offices if that's their preference. It's not that if somebody attends an office that we feel we have to negotiate or advocate for them, but generally people who feel more vulnerable and who don't feel strong enough to argue if they feel, or to contact their creditor, they will want to have somebody advocate on their behalf. However, it's not the only way that they can access our support. So in Ireland, as I mentioned, MABS is only 30, it's 30 years old this year, but in 2012, we launched our Personal Insolvency Act was enacted. And under the Act, there is a number of statutory debt solutions that are available. And each solution, as you can see here, there were three: a debt relief notice, a debt settlement arrangement, and a personal solvency arrangement. Each of those solutions do have different eligibility criteria, and eligibility based on income or the amount of debt or the type of debt, with a personal insolvency arrangement particularly focused on mortgage debt as well as secondary debt. And then a debt relief notice is focused for people who have debt less than 30,000 and who do not own their own home. So each solution has a different criteria, but suit people differently as well. But when we're working with people, we are a gateway to these debt solutions. However, we do process the debt relief notice on behalf of a debtor, and the others are processed with a personal insolvency practitioner, who's a commercial entity working alongside MABS. So the debt solutions that MABS can offer directly, and probably the one that people wish to access most, is the voluntary debt solution. And I think because we're 30 years old and our statutory insolvency legislation is only 10 years old, people in Ireland are still getting used to insolvency being not a dirty word and not a big serious word, as a good option. I think there's fear for new as well. So we do the primary that we will offer is a statutory solution, as in when somebody contacts, if they have a statutory solution that they're suitable and eligible for, we're obliged to advise them that this is the case. But we do find that most people will want to look at a voluntary solution. As I mentioned there, we do offer the statutory solution as well. And then finally, we are a gateway. MABS are a gateway to the Awalia scheme. And Awalia is the Irish word for home. And this scheme was launched in 2016, and it is funded through three departments: the Department of Finance, the Department of Social Welfare, and the Department of Justice. And it provides legal, financial, and money advice supports to people to try with the aim of keeping them in their home where it is appropriate to do so. So some of the success that we have in our voluntary solutions comes from our reputation through the 30 years of working with other agencies, with creditors, with the banking industry, with the utility industry. And because of that, we have really strong relationships between each other. We have regular meetings. We have regular meetings attended by the the banks maybe, and some of their frontline staff and some money advisors, and then the senior management in MABS. And the aim of these meetings is to discuss and explore our experiences of working together. And over the years, these meetings have resulted in us setting out some protocols. And a protocol being a document, but not a legal document, an arrangement about how we will work together and how we work to find solutions for our clients and the bank's customer or debtor. So there are a number of statutory solutions as well, or statutory codes that do oblige the credit industry, the utility industry to work with MABS, and I will talk about them in a few minutes. So just very briefly to give you a bit more detail on the Awalia program. So this, as I mentioned, the program is a multi-departmental program where the aim is to keep people in their home as it is suited to do so. And the MABS is the gateway to Awalia, but people can access Awalia through the courts as well, or through the personal insolvency practitioners. And MABS then, through the Awalia program, have introduced a court mentor scheme where our MAB staff attend the repossession courts around the country that happen each week. And what the court mentor's role is to help if a borrower turns up, a homeowner turns up that's been called before the court that day, that the court mentor will explain what's happening, explain where they should sit, maybe to explain to them how that they should or what they should tell the court, and maybe sometimes introduce them to the solicitors. We don't have a voice in court, however we do have a presence in court, and the court registrars or judges will refer to the fact that MABs are present on the day, and particularly if they feel that the person has never availed of MABs but that their solution might be achievable, they do refer at the end of each court hearing to us. We have found that, particularly since the court mentor, over the years, since that's been introduced, the more people have attended court. And the success of the Awalia scheme is something that we're quite proud of. You know, that I can't give you the exact number of cases that have been saved, but generally the success is that we feel that everybody who's been brought before court for repossession has had the support of MABS, has had all of their options explored, and then perhaps a positive outcome. This scheme remains a pilot, the Awalya scheme, and it's running until December 2023, with a review expected during this summer and hopefully a further extension. So I mentioned protocols, and one of the strongest protocol and one of the longest protocols that we have is one that we have with the Banking and Payment Federation of Ireland. And this is not a hard law, so it's not an act, it's not a statutory instrument, it's not legislated for, and it's similar to so the code of conduct for mortgage arrears is in fact a statutory code. It is enforceable by the courts. However, the Banking Federation one is not. So the banks cannot be compelled to apply it or to work through it. However, it is a very successful goodwill based understanding between MABS and each of the lenders that work with the Banking Federation. And the protocol itself has had a very long standing success. We have found that all banks, while they're not compelled to work with it or apply it, they do apply it. They do look to seek to find an arrangement for a debtor and to work with MABS. And the one of the I suppose the basis of the protocol is that each lending institution will examine all the options that are available to the debtor, and that under the protocol that they will give us a solution that's suitable if possible. But if there isn't a solution, they'll work with us to explain why there mightn't be a solution. And it does provide for clear communication as well between MABS and the banks. So one of the things that the is now legislated for in Ireland, which wasn't before the 2012 Insolvency Act, is a protected level of income. So before we kind of were working with the credit industry, putting forward financial statements and offers that sometimes we ended up being in disagreement with what should be provided and protected for to to um, to maintain a domestic bill, food, light, heat. So with the Insolvency Act of 2012, in it is a section on the reasonable living expenses. And this is now legislated for. And we have a tool where we can go online and we can set out what would be the legally protected income in a home, by how many people are in the home, by the age of the children, whether they're rural, whether they drive a car or they don't. So all of these different variations of family life and family expenses are protected in the budget: light, heat, education, medication, clothing, all the firsts, all the primaries. There's an amount in it for social expenses as well. If anybody has an interest, you can find that on our insolvency legislation here. You can see in the slide on our insolvency website, excuse me, and you'll be able to have a look and see how that is designed. But for MABS, this tool we can use not only when we're doing statutory, but also when we're doing voluntary arrangements. Other codes and protocols that we have designed and secured by negotiation and good relations with the other industries over the years. So we are a feature of the Code of Conduct of Mortgage Arrears, which is a statutory code, and that does have an obligation for the lending institution or the servicing company to refer somebody to MABS if they're in mortgage arrears or pre-arrears. The Consumer Protection Code also has a reference and a requirement to refer to MABS in case of difficulties. the Residential Tenancies Board Act, and this was a new legislative change that came in during August 2020 at a time where COVID restrictions had impacted many people's ability to maintain private rent. And this was a new obligation where they had to work with MABS to put forward a financial statement, the Money Lending Code of Conduct, where the moneylender was obliged to, if they felt that when they had an application that this was for the basics, the essentials, light, food, heat, that they would refer the borrower to MABS to see if they had a statutory entitlement or a social welfare entitlement or something else, that borrowing for day-to-day expenses is a danger sign, I suppose, that there's other things happening for families. So that the money lenders industry, money lending industry did take that very seriously, and they do work with us on that. We have an energy provider code of conduct or code of practice, which does include MABs in there at a time when pre-disconnection or if somebody is getting into serious arrears. Transport for Ireland, which is toll charges. And then we are also working with some non-statutory and voluntary arrangements with other industries. At the moment, we're working with the local authorities, with the public housing, and also for the waste charges. And then with the credit union movement. And the credit union movement in Ireland is quite big. In some areas, if there might be a credit union but no bank. So we're working in 2023 with developing a credit union MABS protocol, similar to the one that we have with the Banking Federation. And we hope that that would be successful. So I know that we have had some questions before, so I thank you for your time. And if there's